And the question for you is this, the White House at its first press briefing just announced that seats would be reserved for social media influencers. Before we get to all that ails traditional media, and you've spelled out some of it, there's somebody like yourself, a brilliant editor, a brilliant writer. I didn't say in my introduction that you're also the author of multiple best-selling books. Do you sometimes feel, what did I do all this for? Now some kid who's an influencer is given more importance in this age that we live in?
Well, I think it's lamentable, actually, because, I hate all of this kind of unresearched, opinionated, third-rate sort of garbage they're all spewing out and everybody's listening. It is very depressing, actually. It's depressing how influential it is. That's the issue. We have in America now Joe Rogan, who is the leading podcaster of this genre. And he is the most influential man in America. And it is an incredible thing to think of.
Would you go on his podcast?
Probably would, yes, because the fact is that it would bring me to this massive audience. That's the question. Kamala Harris, when she ran, she declined to go on his podcast, And we know the end of that story, right?
Yeah.
So yes, it is very vexing. But I sort of feel more that real journalists have just got to fight back by getting as good as these influencers are at having that impact and using the tools, as it were, to have that impact. The problem is that very often great journalists are not necessarily particularly telegenic. When I had a TV show, as I don't have to tell you, I thought, great, all the people who worked on The New Yorker will be on my show, it'll be fantastic. I soon realized that put them on and they couldn't do it. That you were looking for performers all the time. So in a way, it's a sort of essential thing, both in politics now and in media. You have to be able to sort of perform your stuff. And if you can't, no one is going to read it.
Politics in the age of Trump is a full performance art, and we'll get to Trump in a moment. But do you not feel uncomfortable that the media, I'm all for great storytelling, but I'm a little bit squeamish about being an actor. And I think the two are different. And, there's this whole generation of influencers who are actually, it's like theater.
Yeah. I'm very squeamish about it because I think that most of the best investigative journalists are not remotely actors. They're usually quite nerdy, sort of interior, curmudgeonly, actually. It's a sort of trait of the investigative journalists. They're so skeptical that, basically they're not sunshine and light. They're all. Yeah. And I love those people. Those are the people I've often worked with for years who do great work. They sit in their room, they just grind it out. They're not interested, actually, at all in being actors. So, it's a lamentable thing that is a
But
fact.
you've adapted. You're on Substack.
Yes, actually, I have decided to start Substack 4 months ago. Mine is called Fresh Hell. Yeah. And why did I decide to do it? First of all, they badgered me and asked me. And then I thought, well, actually, I do want to be in a platform that is sort of leading edge as opposed to having a column in a legacy media newspaper, which I could have done. And I'm finding it actually quite exhilarating because of the direct, unmediated sort of relationship. But the first week or two I started writing it, I felt like I was swimming naked. You are self-publishing. I'm used to sending a piece in, having
it edited,
responded to, back and forth.
Playback.
Actually, of course, what I immediately did was then spend all the earnings I was making on Substack by hiring an editor, having a lawyer. I gave myself those things because I wouldn't write without an editor looking at it. I just wouldn't. I wouldn't trust myself. And let alone not have a legal read. I've never done anything without a legal read.
Yeah.
So I want those things, but it is a strange feeling to realize that you're just sort of putting yourself out there without any of that protective covering. So, I was nervous at first and I thought this is really not going to be for me at all. But actually since then, it's quite exciting to see the spike of readers and really know who they are. They send their emails. There are all these people out there who I don't know, who suddenly are these readers. Yeah. And, they we have these reader chats now and they're very smart, really very smart people. So I'm starting to kind of, enjoy that, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I always say, look, technology is going to change whether or not we accompany it for the ride. And if we don't master it, it's going to master us.
Right.
So there's no point lamenting.
There's no point in lamenting. Exactly. This is where the action really is now,
Absolutely.
So, and you can build a very big audience like that. But the problem is it's the siloed nature of things that I do find, that's the only thing I truly regret, which is that, you can have 150,000 people reading you, but
the newsroom is dead.
The newsroom
you're alone.
You're alone. Yeah. And also, are there the 150,000 people that are talking to one another? There used to be a thing where, I mean, it is still true. Like in the summer, I wrote a piece about my son, who is has developmental delays and Asperger's. I wrote about him in the New York Times, and gotta say, the response was so overwhelmingly huge. It reminded me of just, there is that legacy media impact thing that you can't really get in all these different.
So there is scale. Legacy media has scale. Yeah. It's just that it doesn't use that scale to effect.
No,
I would say,
and also has an audience that is. It's too in its bubble. It truly doesn't cross over.
Navel gazing.
Yeah, it just doesn't cross over. The audience is so huge, but it doesn't include all these other people. And it means that if you only are reading the New York Times, you truly don't really know what's going on. And this is, of course, first became apparent when Trump won.
Yeah.
When everybody who read the New York Times was utterly, utterly sure it was going to be Hillary, because they only read the New York Times, really, essentially.
Yeah. So Trump just called Jim Acosta of CNN a big loser and said it was great news that he was leaving the network. This after the network pushed him to the graveyard shift of midnight. So I think Acosta had no choice but to leave. What's happening with promoters in the US media? For us in India, we used to, there are many things to criticize in the United States of America, but I genuinely used to believe that it's the freest country in the world. And to see promoters, owners being able to dictate, in a way, policy in the way that has happened since Trump became president is really quite startling. Clearly Acosta has been buried because Trump hates him.
That's right. It's stunning. I think all of us are really shocked by it. The biggest example is Jeff Bezos, right? He bought the Washington Post. It was a rounding error in terms of the money he was putting out, but it was thrilling that somebody in the tech world, and everybody thought, hooray, somebody who's got a big tech brain and a big tech fortune is buying the Washington Post. He'll bring all of that to this great newspaper. And for the first 5 years, he was really an exemplary owner. But now in Trump's second term, basically, he's gone all in Trump. And the whole atmosphere's changed. He famously killed the endorsement piece they were going to run.
Well, he argued that a paper shouldn't be endorsing candidates.
Yes, he did argue that, but unfortunately he argued it sort of on the eve of the election. He didn't say, if he'd done it 6 months before and said, we've got a new policy, nobody would have said anything. But it was so obvious that it was like they all suddenly panicked and they realized that Trump was going to win. They didn't want to be there anymore. And the owner of the LA Times did the same thing. The owner of the LA Times, who actually is he's in the medical, has a medical fortune in the tech, biotech business. Today he just endorsed, Bobby Kennedy, who is, anti-vaccines. And it's extraordinary. This is a man who actually has manufactured vaccines, and he has just endorsed Bobby Kennedy Jr.
And Zuckerberg reversed 5 years of Meta/Facebook policy just to be in with Trump.
That's exactly right. He basically went to Mar-a-Lago. He had lunch with Trump. The next day, he killed the fact-checking aspect of Meta, which actually was a bit of a joke anyway, because it was all pretense. It's just a pretense and a shill. But he killed it. And, he also, got rid of his whole DEI department instantly. It was just instant. It's as if they've taken some kind of, it's like a virus. They've just decided they're going to go all in. And
what are they scared of? What are they scared of?
Well, the fact is that they all have business with the government. They all do. With the case of Jeff Bezos, with his, Blue Origin space thing that he has, he needs, government, NASA, he needs all these things.
Yeah.
And in the last go-round, Amazon did lose a big contract with the Defense Department, which was Trump's retaliation to the Washington Post. And this time he's decided, I don't want to do that anymore. And so he isn't. He's going all in, and the paper is supposed to go all in too.
And it's Semaphore reported that the Washington Post, where I have been writing for 7 years, has lost numbers in the millions.
Yes.
In the millions. Like something like a fall from 22 million users every day to 2 million. Like that,
right. No,
that drastic.
That's what was so extraordinary, was that when they made this decision to kill the endorsement, I think that they just thought, well, so what? Nobody cares, right? But in a way, it was kind of rather inspiring that readers just totally cancelled the Washington Post. I mean, they did care. They cared very much. And their attempts to now sort of grow their subscription base has been catastrophically undermined. I mean, they've lost all the people that they had spent years trying to grow.
But what does that tell us about partisanship? You see, today, as media practitioners, we are under enormous pressure to make ourselves relevant in an age fueled by tribalism, partisanship, opinion. Everything that we were schooled at, facts first, don't wear your opinion on your sleeve in a news report, don't let people be able to look at your content and see who you vote for. This is how I was taught journalism, even, in all the places I worked at. Today, all of that has been turned on its head. How does a journalist, a storyteller, a content creator, an author, a writer navigate the pressure to be partisan?
I mean, half of it is about this is really why these Substacks and so on are important, because really you can only be as brave as you're allowed to be, right? I mean, if you're writing, if the corporates over you and who own you, are not allowing this kind of content that's real, how can you publish?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard. I mean, you can't go off and publish it on your own. You have to, your network or your newspaper is saying, like, we don't want that. Absolutely. And they let you go.
Yeah.
So it is extremely difficult. But at the same time, I mean, I am enormously inspired still by journalists. I've started, my husband, when he died, I started a foundation for him, for his legacy in journalism, called the Sir Harry Evans Investigative Journalism Fund, where we give a scholarship to a young investigative journalist. And I put on this convening once a year with great journalists who come in. And what is actually inspiring is, I mean, we had like nearly 1,000 applicants for the one, journalism spot, because the winner gets to work at Reuters. Such brilliant work is being done. And I'm looking at these things and I'm thinking, these are kids doing these really sort of rigorous investigations, usually on a few non-profit dollars that they've scratched together.
Yeah.
They're in their own apartments. They're in no newsroom of any kind. They're longing for newsrooms. One of the reasons that they apply is because the thought of working in a Reuters newsroom for them is total heaven. They have no one to mentor them, nothing. But they're still doing incredibly brave things. And then these foreign reporters who they go off to to report, in the Middle East and in Ukraine without any sort of backing of big big media. And sadly, a lot of them get killed too because they don't have that sort of security support. But they're still going. It's almost like, journalists, it is a vocation, actually. It's a passion profession even now. It's a passion profession, and it's still, that passion hasn't been killed. And there's a lot of idealism still there. But there is an elitism that we need to acknowledge and own, at least in people like us. Because, I was thinking of a young reporter whose body was found in a tank in a small town of Chhattisgarh, an Indian state. And he had been reporting on corruption in the building of roads. And literally, his body was found. He'd been tortured, killed. And now he's a small town guy, right? He's a small town guy with no organizational backing and has no sort of elite privilege that we, even with all of our challenges, continue to have. Yes. So there is this elitism in the media as well, right? Right. Well, I agree. And I think, one of the things I try to do with this foundation is to find people like that kid, and say, support them at least for a year and help them get ahead, because it is a vocation and they do these immensely brave things. And a lot of what they're doing is corruption is a massive topic. Yeah. In the people who submit, many of them have been reporting on corruption. There's a lot of very interesting networks forming, though, that are the sort of new way of doing investigative journalism. Collaboration and alliances.
But is all this going to survive in the age of Trump? I mean, he's basically, for instance, stopped funding all over the world. This has impacted the IPI, the International Press Institute. I'm a member of the executive board, and we got emails yesterday saying that the Africa program is actually going to shut down because it's an immediate hit.
Really?
It's an immediate hit. So we have to wait and see how the Trump presidency sort of evolves. But I want to ask you about Trump, because in Vanity Fair Diaries, you have this this brilliant graph, this brilliant sort of clutch of sentences where because you knew Trump before he was this Trump, and you sort of knew him in New York, and he was what you call an entertaining con man.
That's right.
You, in a way, saw what was coming because you actually write that the American public like this.
That's right. I did. I read the manuscript of his book, The Art of the Deal, when it was just this business guy who'd written a book. And I bought it for Vanity Fair to extract it because I loved the voice of the book. I thought it was hilarious. And I just thought, I thought it was all, I said, I think it's bullshit, but it's entertaining bullshit and people are going to love it. And that's exactly right. He was, in those days, a much more sort of ebullient, sort of funny Barnum and Bailey guy. I mean, a real sort of New York character, such as we're used to. Outrageous. I mean, he used an expression, which is good actually, where he said he thinks that people like hyperbole. He said about sort of fake hyperbole. They like to think there's something bigger out there to aspire to, even though they know that it isn't really true. So he understood that.
The acting quotient.
Yeah, the acting quotient and the idea of thinking big. We can all be huge, but actually, of course, we can't all be huge. But it's a fantasy that people like, particularly Americans. So he was an entertaining character in those days, and
a likable one. One of the things you wrote in Vanity Fair Diaries is that his bullshit had a certain authenticity. Explain that.
Well, I think that is true. I think Trump that is his appeal. He is authentic. He's an authentic bullshitter, if there is such a thing,
Yeah.
But he was much
What's
lighter.
An authentic bullshitter? Like, that sounds like an oxymoron.
I know, well, it is an oxymoron. And that's what his appeal is, essentially. Is like, he sort of he half believes it. And he says,
and he wings the rest.
Yeah. And the rest of it he just hopes might come true, or he'll pretend he didn't say it. It's all the same thing. But he got a lot darker as time went by. And as a matter of fact, I think it really sort of started with the end of his marriage to Ivana, the first wife. Ivana was actually rather been written out of the Trump story, but I think she was actually a huge help to Trump. She sort of brought him into sort of New York society. When I first met Trump, it was at a lunch or a dinner, I think it was, that Ivana had given. She was the one who was interested in getting into society and sort of bringing him in. Once she'd gone, that was the end. You never saw Trump in society ever again. He was not sort of accepted, if you like, in the sort of echelons of the Wall Street, the big pashas of Wall Street. He was considered vulgar. He was a man from Queens. Nobody cared at all, which is part of his, great resentment.